In the heart of a remote village named Fairhaven, nestled amidst the rolling hills of 18th century Europe, there existed a dark and harrowing tale, a story of persecution, hysteria, and the horrifying fate of a woman accused of being a witch. The villagers of Fairhaven were not unlike those of many other villages during that superstitious time. They lived in fear of the unknown and harbored deep suspicions of anyone who appeared different or held unconventional beliefs. Among them was a woman named Eliza, who resided on the outskirts of the village in a small, thatched-roof cottage. Eliza, with her unconventional appearance and her love for the natural world, was the subject of whispered rumors and wary glances. Her long auburn hair, vibrant and untamed, flowed like a river of flames down her back, and her bright green eyes radiated an otherworldly intelligence. Her attire consisted of flowing, earth-toned garments that marked her as a figure apart from the traditional villagers. But it was not just Eliza's appearance that set her apart. It was her knowledge of the natural world and her affinity for herbs and potions. She had a garden that bloomed with rare and unusual plants, and her understanding of the healing properties of herbs was said to be unparalleled. In the eyes of the villagers, these talents were not a source of admiration but of suspicion. They whispered tales of her ability to conjure storms, heal wounds, and speak to the spirits of the forest. Her garden, which seemed to flourish even in the harshest of seasons, was believed to be enchanted, a place where dark rituals and spells were conducted. Rumors of witchcraft began to circulate, and with each passing day, the fear and suspicion grew. It was the early days of the witch hunts, and Fairhaven was not immune to the frenzy that had gripped the region. Accusations were flung like daggers, and the village became a breeding ground for paranoia. The village council, fueled by the whispers and fear, made a fateful decision. They deemed Eliza a witch and declared that she must be brought to justice. The accusation sent shockwaves through the village, and many believed it was a mistake, a result of superstition and hysteria. Eliza, aware of the accusations against her, chose to face the council with dignity and poise. She stood before them, her head held high, and spoke of her love for the natural world, her knowledge of healing, and her desire to live in harmony with the village. She declared her innocence, but her words fell on deaf ears. The village council, swayed by the fear and superstition that had taken root, found Eliza guilty of witchcraft. Her fate was sealed, and the sentence was to be carried out with haste. She was to be hanged in the village square, a punishment that was meant to serve as a warning to all who dared to defy the established norms. As the day of Eliza's execution drew near, a sense of dread settled over the village. Many could not shake the feeling that they were condemning an innocent woman to her death. Some even believed that Eliza's knowledge and affinity for nature were gifts, not curses, and that the village would suffer for its decision. The day of the execution arrived, casting a pall of gloom over Fairhaven. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces somber and hearts heavy. Eliza, her hands bound, was led to the gallows, where a crowd had gathered to witness the horrifying spectacle. As she stood on the platform, the noose around her neck, Eliza remained composed. She refused to beg for mercy or admit to a crime she had not committed. She looked out at the villagers with a sadness in her eyes, a silent plea for understanding and compassion. The crowd watched in silence as the executioner tightened the noose and prepared to carry out the sentence. But just as the trapdoor was about to be released, a commotion erupted in the crowd. A man, his clothes disheveled and his face contorted with anguish, pushed his way to the front. It was Benjamin, Eliza's husband. Stop this madness," Benjamin cried, his voice breaking with emotion. He had been absent during the trial, away on a journey to a neighboring village, and had only just returned to the horrifying news. The executioner hesitated, and the crowd grew restless. Benjamin, his eyes filled with desperation, pleaded with the council and the villagers to spare his wife's life. He spoke of her innocence, of her love for the village, and of the terrible mistake that was about to be made. The village council, caught in a moment of uncertainty, decided to delay the execution. Benjamin's impassioned plea had stirred doubt and a glimmer of compassion among some of the villagers. It was decided that Eliza's fate would be revisited the next day, and the crowd dispersed, leaving the gallows empty. That night, the village was filled with unease and tension. The decision to delay Eliza's execution had created a sense of division among the villagers. Some believed that the delay was a sign that justice would prevail, while others saw it as an opportunity to further condemn her. Eliza, imprisoned in a small, cold cell, awaited her fate. She was aware of the turmoil that had engulfed the village, and her heart ached for her husband, who had risked everything to save her. As the sun rose on the day of the reconsideration, the village council gathered to decide Eliza's fate once more. The crowd that had assembled was a sea of conflicting emotions, with some pleading for her release and others demanding her immediate execution. Benjamin, having spent the night pleading with the villagers and council members, made a final, impassioned appeal for his wife's life. He spoke of the injustice that would be committed if Eliza were to be hanged for a crime she had not committed. The village council, after much deliberation and internal strife, made a decision. Eliza would not be hanged, but she would be banished from the village. She was to leave Fairhaven and never return, a punishment that would ensure that the village remained free of her supposed influence. The decision brought a mixed reaction from the villagers. Some felt that justice had been served, while others believed that Eliza had been wronged and that the banishment was a cruel and unjust punishment. Benjamin, relieved that his wife's life had been spared, was left with a heavy heart. Eliza, her face marked with resignation, gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the village that had been her home for so long. She felt the weight of the unfair judgment that had been cast upon her, and the pain of being separated from her husband was almost unbearable. As she walked to the edge of the village, the villagers watched in silence. They had been part of a dark and haunting chapter in their village's history, one that would be remembered with regret and sorrow. Eliza, as she crossed the boundary that marked the end of Fairhaven, cast a last mournful glance back at her home. Story 2. In a remote and secluded village nestled deep within the heart of the 17th century countryside, a dark and haunting tale of superstition and fear unfolded. It was a story of a mother, her son, and a horrifying tragedy born from suspicion of witchcraft. The village, like many others of the time, was steeped in superstitions and folklore, where the line between reality and the supernatural was often blurred. Among the villagers there lived a woman named Isabella, a solitary figure who resided in a cottage at the edge of the woods. Isabella had always been an enigmatic presence, her long, raven-black hair cascading down her back, her eyes a deep, piercing blue that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. Her attire, flowing and dark, set her apart from the traditional villagers, and her affinity for herbs, potions, and natural remedies only added to the mystery surrounding her. The villagers whispered tales of Isabella's uncanny knowledge of the forest, her ability to communicate with animals, and her supposed power to influence the weather. Her cottage, adorned with peculiar symbols and charms, was believed to be a place of magic and enchantment, and the villagers regarded it with a mix of fascination and fear. Over time, the rumors about Isabella took a darker turn. Whispers of spells, curses, and a pact with the devil circulated through the village. The symbols that adorned her cottage were seen as ominous, and her affinity for the natural world was reinterpreted as something sinister. As the villagers succumbed to paranoia and suspicion, a fear of witchcraft began to grip the community. Accusations were made, and Isabella found herself at the center of a growing storm. The village, caught in the throes of hysteria, demanded that she be brought to justice. It was during a period of unrelenting fear and suspicion that Isabella's son, William, found himself torn between his loyalty to his mother and the pressure of the villagers. He had always known that his mother was different, but he could not fathom that she could be capable of the sinister acts she was accused of. As the accusations mounted, William found himself caught in a web of conflicting emotions. He loved his mother deeply and believed in her innocence, yet the fear and hysteria that pervaded the village threatened to consume them both. One fateful day, the village council convened to decide Isabella's fate. The accusations against her were grave, and the council, swayed by the fear and paranoia of the villagers, declared her a witch. She was to be put on trial and, if found guilty, subjected to a punishment that struck terror into the hearts of all who heard it. The trial was a harrowing ordeal, a spectacle that drew the villagers like moths to a flame. Isabella stood before the council, her head held high, and declared her innocence. She spoke of her love for the natural world, her knowledge of healing, and her desire to live in harmony with the village. But her words fell on deaf ears. The accusations of witchcraft were too deeply ingrained in the minds of the villagers, and they saw Isabella as a threat to their very existence. The evidence against her, largely circumstantial and based on fear, was enough to sway the council's judgment. Isabella was declared guilty of witchcraft, and the council pronounced a punishment that would put fear into every villager. She was to be tied to a stake and cast into the deep, forbidding waters of the village pond, a method of execution believed to purify the village from her dark influence. The day of Isabella's execution dawned, casting a dark shadow over the village. The villagers gathered at the edge of the pond, their faces a mixture of dread and anticipation. Isabella, her hands bound and her eyes filled with determination, was led to the stake that stood at the water's edge. As she gazed out at the crowd that had gathered to witness her fate, Isabella's eyes met her son's. William, torn between his love for his mother and the pressure of the villagers, could not bear to watch her suffer. The executioner, his face a mask of determination, bound Isabella to the stake and prepared to carry out the sentence. The crowd watched in silence as the stake was set ablaze and Isabella's body was cast into the dark, icy waters of the pond. Story 3. Once in a quiet and remote village nestled in the heart of 18th century Europe, where the whispers of the dense forest encroached upon every dwelling, a tale of terror and tragedy was woven into the very fabric of the community. It was a story kept secret for generations, a dark memory that one daughter, now grown, was finally ready to share. The daughter, Elena, sat in a dark room with her granddaughter, Clara, who was visiting from the bustling city. The old woman's face was weathered, her eyes heavy with the weight of years lived, and her hands trembling as she clutched a worn diary. The diary had been passed down through the family, a relic of times long past, filled with secrets and stories that had chilled the hearts of generations. Elena's voice quivered as she began her tale, her words like the ghostly echoes of the past. "Clara, my dear, I want to tell you about your great-great-grandmother, Eliza. She was the daughter of a woman who, in her own time, was whispered about in hushed tones as a witch." Clara's eyes widened with curiosity and a touch of trepidation. "A witch, Grandma? You mean like casting spells and flying on broomsticks?" Elena chuckled softly. "No, not like that, my child. There were no broomsticks or cauldrons in our family. What I mean is that Eliza's mother, a woman named Agnes, was accused of witchcraft in a time when fear and superstition ran deep, and she paid a terrible price." The tale began to unfold as Elena delved into the diary, her voice filled with both nostalgia and sadness. In the heart of the 18th century, the village of Eldenwood was a place of natural beauty and isolation, where the whispers of the forest concealed more secrets than the villagers dared to admit. Agnes, a woman of singular beauty and enigmatic charm, lived on the outskirts of the village in a small cottage nestled between ancient oaks. The villagers gossiped about her, and many believed her to possess a strange power. Some spoke of her uncanny ability to heal wounds and illnesses, while others whispered of her strange herbs and potions. Eliza, her daughter, had grown up in the shadow of her mother's mysterious reputation. Her striking resemblance to Agnes only fueled the rumors, and as she reached adolescence, the whispers turned from admiration to suspicion. Eliza was a quiet and introspective girl, finding solace in the secrets of the forest that surrounded their home. She often ventured deep into the woods, drawn to the silence and the hidden glens where the air was thick with enchantment. One fateful evening, Eliza was returning from one of her forest excursions when she crossed paths with a man she had never seen before. Tall and imposing, he was draped in tattered clothing, his beard unkempt, and his eyes gleaming with a feral intensity. He introduced himself as Matthias, a wanderer who had lost his way. Eliza, compassionate by nature, offered him food and shelter for the night. As the days turned into weeks, Matthias's presence cast a dark shadow over the cottage. He was not the harmless wanderer he had appeared to be. He whispered to Eliza of power and secrets, of forces hidden deep within the forest that could be harnessed to change one's fate. At first, Eliza resisted his charms, but slowly, his words began to take hold of her. The isolation of their cottage and the allure of the unknown proved too enticing. Agnes, sensing the growing danger, confronted her daughter. "Eliza, you must be cautious of this man. He carries with him a darkness I cannot explain. There is no power worth the price he may demand." But Eliza, now enthralled by Matthias, could not hear her mother's warning. She believed that her destiny was intertwined with the stranger's, that together they could unlock the secrets of the forest. Days turned into nights and nights into fevered rituals deep in the heart of the woods. The villagers, fearful and suspicious, watched from afar as Eliza and Matthias grew more enigmatic with each passing day. They knew that something had to be done, for their superstitions and paranoia had reached a fever pitch. They believed Agnes and her daughter were witches, and their presence was a curse upon Eldenwood. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, the villagers, armed with torches and resolve, descended upon Agnes's cottage. The scene that unfolded was one of chaos and terror. Agnes and Eliza were dragged from their home, accused of practicing dark sorcery. They were bound, their hands and feet tightly secured, and the mob began chanting accusatory spells and curses. Amid the chaos, Matthias, who had quietly disappeared into the night, watched from the shadows. He had manipulated the villagers, knowing that their fear and ignorance would be their downfall. As the torches drew closer, he slipped away, leaving Agnes and Eliza to face the wrath of the mob. Elena paused for a moment, her eyes filled with tears as she recalled the pain of her ancestors. It was a gruesome sight, Clara. I won't go into the details of the trials and the torture, but it was a horrific ordeal that Agnes and Eliza endured. In the end, they were found guilty of witchcraft. Clara shivered, her imagination running wild with the horrors of that night. What happened to them, Grandma? Elena took a deep breath, her voice trembling with the weight of the story. They were taken to the outskirts of the village, tied to stakes, and the mob, driven to madness by their fear and ignorance, set them on fire. Agnes and Eliza, mother and daughter, burned together in the name of superstition. The room fell into a heavy silence as Clara tried to process the gruesome ending of the tale. The horror of that night, the innocence of Agnes and Eliza, and the cruelty of the villagers haunted her thoughts. Elena continued, "The worst part, Clara, is that Matthias, the true manipulator, was never found. He vanished into the darkness of the forest, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake." Clara, her young heart heavy with the weight of the story, finally spoke. "But why are you telling me this, Grandma? Why share this dark secret now?" Elena's eyes met Clara's with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I tell you this because the memory of what happened to Agnes and Eliza must never be forgotten. We must remember the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of those who spread fear and hatred. We must remember that true evil often wears the mask of innocence. And most importantly, we must remember that it is our duty to ensure that such horrors are never repeated."